Hello and welcome to Technology Today. I'm Susan Houghton with Lawrence Livermore National Lab. A community survey was commissioned by the lab in January 2000. It's the fourth such survey we've conducted in the past 10 years. And in the next half hour, we'll talk about this survey, the results, and how the lab is responding to some of the issues. My guest today is Charles Rund. He's president of Charlton Research Corporation. Charles, Chuck, I guess like you like to be called. Thank you. Welcome for coming. And you're the firm that conducted not only this research, but the previous four researches that or three researches that we've had, surveys we've had.
So yes, over the last decade.
Over the last decade, yeah.
For 10 years.
Before we get into the survey results, which we're going to actually show some of them today, let's talk just theory about research and about surveys. Is polling common? Do corporations and government entities do this kind of thing?
Yeah, they do, Susan, and I think the reason why is because you can't go out any longer with the complexity of our society and talk to every single citizen of your local community. In just the Livermore Valley, there literally are hundreds of thousands of people who belong to the community. And so what are their ideas about what they would like to see the laboratory do, or Pleasanton do, or Livermore do, or any of the towns? And so surveys have become very common to have democracy kind of bring the citizens' ideas to the table, so people can actually talk about them and see what their thoughts are.
Okay, so we obviously know that politicians do surveys, and when this is election year, there's probably a lot of them. You're probably pretty busy.
Every day.
But government entities and universities do them too.
Yes. Yes. In fact, the University of California and all the university systems are very interested in education. And so it's not unusual that they take time to ask the pupils, ask their teachers, ask the citizens in the communities they're around, what kind of an educational system should we have? How should we begin to change and think about it? So it's very common for public policy to be built by asking the public what they think some of the policy items should be. Of course, they always ask the experts too. So the experts play a role, but so does the citizens in a democracy.
Okay. Well, let's look at the survey that we did for Lawrence Livermore Lab, and we have let's go to our first slide here and we can talk a little bit about it. It was a community survey administered by your corporation, Charlton Research Corporation, your company. Tell us a little bit about your company. It is a nationwide company, correct?
Yes, it is. We have offices in Walnut Creek and in Washington, D.C. We do public policy research pretty exclusively. That means we look at issues, whether the issues are healthcare or the environment or foreign policy or taxes or Social Security issues, or in this case, just citizens' attitudes towards one of the nation's laboratories, of which there are two, of course, you and Los Alamos, that are run by the University of California. So here we were looking at the issues that you and other kinds of public policy-oriented groups look at. So our company basically does interviews of all kinds, one-on-one, where we talk to people, we bring people together in small group sessions, we talk to them on the telephone, we talk to them in shopping malls, on the street, in many different kinds of ways.
Okay, and that's known as a qualitative survey.
Yes.
And the survey that Lawrence Livermore did was a quantitative survey.
Correct.
Which means we actually called people on the phone. Let's, for example, go to the next slide and take a look at what our numbers were. We did do this survey in January 2000. It was a telephone survey, approximately 38 questions, 600 adults, and they were residents of Livermore, Pleasanton, Tracy, Manteca, and San Jose. And I see at the bottom of the screen we have a phrase, plus or minus 4%. What does that mean?
Well, that's what we call the margin of error for the survey, and that means that this is known as the science of almost being certain. It's not the science of certainty. So what the mathematics tell us is that you talked to a number of random selected citizens, all of whom have an equal opportunity of participating in the survey, but you always have a margin that may not represent all of their points of view. So when you look at the data today, when we see these other survey answers we're going to put up, if they're very close together, like 40% say yes and 40% say no, and then 20% are undecided, it could be 44 or 36. So it could vary by 4 percentage points one way or the other in a plus or minus way. However, if we look at information, as we see in the survey later on, where it says 70% of the people think one way and only 25 think another way, well, that's clearly outside the margin of error, and so it says we can pretty well be assured that that data is statistically valid.
And that's truly an opinion, the way that the
Precisely.
survey results came out.
Right.
Okay, let's take a look at our first slide that we have here. And of course we did have, I think we talked about 38 questions. We're obviously not going to be able to show all of those to you in a 30-minute program, but we are going to show a few of them. And the first one we're going to start off with was actually, I believe, the very first question that was asked of survey participants. And that is, what is the most important issue in your community? And Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this was an open-ended question in which people said, just you tell us what you think is a problem. And they might have said, gosh, I think we have environmental problems, and it might have meant something along the lines of traffic or growth, or it might be social problems, the crime, drugs, or issues of education, issues with our youth, or it might have been economic problems, cost of living, certainly we know that is an issue in the Bay Area, unemployment, and then finally you see down here Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Obviously this adds up to more than 100%. People could answer more than one topic, correct?
Yes. In fact, what we do is we let people give as many answers to an open-ended question as is possible. And the reason why you ask this question first is we actually are interested in what people think the problems are, not what we think the problems are, so we can test out our theories with them, you see.
Okay.
So you begin a survey by actually asking people what they think the problem is, and then let them represent that. In this answer, it's really interesting. This question of environmental concerns has been number 1 or number 2 for all 10 years of the 1990s that we've been doing the surveys for Lawrence Livermore National Labs. The social problems area has oftentimes been number 2 or number 3, trading off with economics. Early in the 90s it was more economic concerns. In the mid-90s things changed over to social problems. Intriguingly about the data is that statewide in California, the number 1 problem statewide is social problems at about 55 or 60%. Say social problems,
Not
and
environmental.
only about 4 or 5% say environmental problems.
So we really have an anomaly here.
Exactly. The local community is much more concerned about these environmental issues and concerns, and that means that policymakers and leaders in the community and groups such as the laboratory should begin to address these kinds of concerns and issues because the public is concerned about them.
And again, when we say environmental, we mean everything from traffic
Precisely.
to roads to, so issues like BART, which is a big issue for our community. That's why that becomes important. Okay, very good information. Let's take a look at the next slide here then that we have. And the next question is, what comes first to mind when you hear the words LLNL? And actually we also said probably when you hear the phrase Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And again, an open-ended question, what do you think of when you hear the phrase Lawrence Livermore National Lab? 28% said science research, 17% nuclear research, 11% said, well, I know they have a lot of jobs out there, and 27% said other. And that might have fallen into the category of, say, oh, I know they're government, having something to do with government. Does this surprise you a little bit?
No, actually, the part that surprises me a little bit on that answer is the fact that they're putting science in front of research. We've been testing this question again throughout the 1990s, and often we've found that the answer's just been research or nuclear research or nuclear arms lab or things like that. And so that the things would immediately come to mind in people's mind would tend to be along those lines. It's much broader today as the laboratory has begun to change, as the whole relationship to the less nuclear intensity, more involved in healthcare, other kinds of science structures have been developed at the laboratory. Things have really changed, and so the public is picking up on some of these changes, interestingly enough, and are now moving into a scientific kind of conversation versus just nuclear research and nuclear weapons lab, and which it started as, actually, back in the old days.
Well, and a good example of that might be the whole Joint Genome Institute, and the fact that a lot of people might say, well, I know they had something to do with the Human Genome Project and drafting the chromosomes, and so they know that, and it's not necessarily nuclear, as you said, but it is a myriad of subjects that the lab is interested in. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. How important is Lawrence Livermore National Lab as a resource for the country? Now, this is important because we are considered a national weapons, nuclear weapons lab. We are obviously a Department of Energy facility, and 80% of the people surveyed agreed that, yes, we think it is an important resource for the country. 7% did not feel it was important, and 13% said they don't know. Why would somebody say, I don't know?
Well, I mean, the county and the area has changed a lot population-wise in the last period of time. I mean, lots of new people have moved into the area, the growth has been strong, and people just probably haven't heard about the laboratory, or they haven't thought about what it means to them. I think the really important number, however, is the 80% compared to the 7%. And that's what we kind of call an 8-to-1 ratio, or even more than that, actually, of people saying they think it's a resource to the country. There's a pride, to a degree, in the idea that a national laboratory is located locally here. And people are aware of it, they've heard about it by and large, they've thought about that set of issues, and they like it. And you have to remember that the ideas of science is a very positive concept in people, and research is not a negative. People think positively about science and research and these kinds of things. So it actually, the lab brings some interesting images to the public for those reasons.
Good point. Okay, let's take a look at the next question. And now we see the phrase up at the very top that says early ballot, and the question is, do you generally have a positive or negative association with Lawrence Livermore National Lab? Positive, 61%, negative, 8%, don't know, 31%. Now, what does that phrase early ballot mean?
Early ballot is when we're trying to actually gauge people in as neutral of part of the questionnaire as possible to say, let me get your impression of something. Now you can ask it, do you have a favorable or unfavorable? Here we said, do you have a positive or negative? And we were trying to force people a little bit to say, to state their opinions about that.
So about this time, people would know, okay, Lawrence Livermore Lab is doing the survey.
Right.
They've asked me maybe 5 or 6 questions. You kind of know they have something to do with research if you didn't know before. Get an early reading.
Yes, and then we ask the question about that. Now, the idea of this data, when you see 61%, saying yes, they have a positive impression, means that the lab is doing something to create that impression, or that the community is doing something, or that they've heard from their friends and their neighbors, or there's something out there to resonate in more of a positive sense. The 31% who did not know anything about it, again, you can see when that group was only 13% when we asked them about the lab. It's now gone to 31 because people said, gee, I don't know. Do I have a positive? Do I have a negative?
I might not have any opinion.
Right, they're a little bit more neutral. So this early ballot is to find out, before we get into a lot of conversation about what the laboratory is doing and what's going on in the community, and educate people about that, we like to ask this early ballot question and gauge this positive and negatives.
Now, I don't think it's any secret that we've had a kind of an interesting year at the lab this year. We've certainly had our share of issues that are important issues that the lab has needed to address, and they range from security to the National Ignition Facility, and these are issues that the lab is certainly working on, as well as the Department of Energy. But when you see that data, that's not to suggest that they haven't ever heard anything negative about the lab. It's just an overall feeling, kind of like, yeah, you hear something bad one time, but that doesn't mean that the whole thing is rotten, kind of a deal.
Exactly, and again, you look at that ratio. You look at that 13 compared to the 61, and if the ratio was 50-50, you'd say, gee, it's 1-to-1, negative to positive, and that's not a very good sign. Here, there's more positive attitudes towards the laboratory than negative. It doesn't mean that the laboratory is not controversial, and it doesn't mean that they're not engaged in controversial things. And that's seen as part of society. I mean, society has controversy in it. You have what kind of transportation systems, what kind of healthcare systems, what kind of environmental remediation needs to be done. All of these create tensions in society, and people take different positions on them. The laboratory is no different as part of the national policy.
And it certainly still means we need to work on those issues and address the issues that we do have.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go to the next question now. Have you read or heard anything recently about Lawrence Livermore National Lab? Now, this is, again, different from the question about impressions, but now it's, gosh, did you open up your newspaper today? Did you hear something about the lab? And we've put 2 survey results on here. Of course, we did this question back in 1998 when we last did our survey, and the results in 1998, 59% of the population said, no, I haven't heard anything about it, while 40% said yes. And then when we asked that question again in January of 2000, when we did this survey this year, 61% said no, I haven't heard anything, and 37% said yes. Well, I can tell you, I think we've been in the news more this year than we probably were in 1998. So why are there those differences?
Well, here's where that margin of error comes through first. I mean, to talk about that, the 4% we talked about earlier, from 1998 to 2000, you can see they're within the margin of error on both of them. So there's not been a great deal of change. Okay. So you have almost 40%, 35 to 40% of the population who are kind of picking something up about the laboratory. They're hearing something regularly. You're part of the news and so on and so forth. But we must remember, and I think, by the way, that's a pretty high number. We have to remember that the laboratory doesn't sell any products. I don't purchase gasoline, I don't purchase my food, bread. They're not a brand name in that sense. What they're making is science and research and those kinds of things. So it's not like a product that someone will go out and purchase something. I mean, lasers haven't been for sale lately that I've noticed, or at least not the real ones. And so I think that suggests that for an organization who's not in the consumer product business.
And we're not putting television commercials on daily.
Not television commercials on, and not these kinds of advertising campaigns. You're part of the government. That's a pretty strong awareness that people have.
The fact that a third of the people do know about us. Right. Does that take into account the fact that people have a tendency to open up a newspaper and headline skim to a certain extent? I know I do that. Right. You know, I'll open up the newspaper and I might know something vaguely about the issues, say, of .com crisis. You know, I know that you've got some problems there, but I don't know the day-to-day details of it. Does that play out here at all?
Yeah, I think people have interests, and life is very busy and very full. I'm sure that as we all would sit here today and just think a little bit about our own life. I mean, it's the kids to school and the summer programs and you know, getting the car fixed, and I mean just all, and getting to work and 2-job families and things like this, and trying to take vacations. Just lots of things are going on in every individual's life. The fact that actually almost 4 out of 10 are saying that they have read something and paid attention to the laboratory is a pretty good number for a nonprofit. In the fact that people's lives are very busy, they're paying attention, I think, and paying attention well. And it's been pretty static in the data. It's been pretty much the same over time.
Okay, good. Let's go to the next question now. And that one is, what specifically have you read or heard about Lawrence Livermore National Lab? And we've categorized the answers. We don't have all of the answers here, but we've categorized the top 3 answers into the subjects of new lasers, NIF, cost overruns, budget cuts. Now again, these were open-ended answers. Yes. People might have said, oh, I've heard about that National Ignition Facility, and so we'd write down National Ignition Facility. And then when you lump them together, they all really mean the same thing, and that is the National Ignition Facility, the laser that we are currently building at Lawrence Livermore Lab. And that garnered 37% of the answers. The next issue was security, China, Asian discrimination, perhaps the espionage issue of Wen Ho Lee, and that garnered 26%. And finally, maybe some environmental issues about Site 300, groundwater, 9%. Does that survey result surprise you at all? No,
it really doesn't. In fact, what it does is it confirms that 37% who said they had heard something about the laboratory actually were talking about the things that have been in the news. Okay. They were interested in those topics. These have been the high-lighted news stories about the laboratory for the year. There's been a lot of news about them, both nationally and locally. And the public came back and told us, yes, I paid attention, and I paid attention to what the news was saying. So these are the lead news stories that I think have addressed by the lab and have been part of the lab's year. And clearly the public has read them and seen them and paid attention.
Knows something about them.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Let's go to the next question now that we have on here. And that is, do you agree or disagree with the statement that Lawrence Livermore National Lab is environmentally responsible? 63% agreed, 9% disagreed, and 28% said don't know. Now, that question might strike some of our viewers as saying, well, why are you asking that question? So tell us the history about this question.
Yeah, the history of this question is that when we began doing the first set of research back in 1990 and 1992, what happened was there were a lot of groundwater problems around the laboratory. The environmental movement was very strong in terms of taking a look and for the laboratory to fix some of the weapons issues that had been. The lab, used to be, I think it was an old Air Force base back in World War II at some point in time. And in those days, there wasn't a thing known as the environmental issue at all. And people just threw things out and dumped them around, and it took time for the whole country, and particularly for the lab as well, to find out these issues, look at them, start cleaning them up and putting them together. So early in the 1990s, this was a very big issue, and the answers were quite different, actually. People said, oh, they didn't have as good of an impression of what the laboratory was doing environmentally, and that the lab needed to actually take actions and work on remediation and solve those problems. problems that it had with the
this would
environment.
be a good example then of a question that we started back in 1990, said, oh my gosh, the environment is an important
Right.
issue for our citizens and our residents. Let's institute some very specific programs to address their concerns.
Right.
And let's continue to poll the same question over the next few years to see if what we have done has made a difference.
Precisely. And in fact, what we've seen is the numbers have gone up favorably towards the laboratory because you've actually done things to solve the problem. You actually have to solve the problem to get the benefit for it. And it was below 50, way below 50% in the early days, and it's now at 60%, 61, as this data shows, and it's suggesting the lab's on the right track. I don't think it's finished. It has lots of things to do. You still have some groundwater, say 300
Right.
other things to kind of go work on, but clearly you're moving in the right direction, and the society is beginning to see those actions.
That's actually probably a pretty good point that we should address, is that it's never a solved problem, it's a process.
Right.
And I think our goal is to try to get to a more favorable answer, but certainly not to say, oh gosh, the public says we've solved our problem, let's move on, but to continually try to gauge what the public says and address the issues that they have of concern.
Yes.
But it continues to be an ongoing
Oh,
process.
and you need to continually engage in it.
Okay, great. All right, let's go to the next question that we have. How much information do you receive from Lawrence Livermore National Lab? 72% said too little, 1% said too much, 18% said the right amount, and 9% said I don't know. Now, I think this is a very interesting thing, because if you look at this answer from strictly a public affairs standpoint, it says, my gosh, we've got our work cut out for us. You public affairs people, we need to hear more from you.
Exactly. They want to hear more about the laboratory. They don't believe they're receiving as much information as they want. Now, we didn't actually ask them how do they want to receive that, because you aren't going to do advertising on television and these kinds of things, and you're not trying to sell products to people. But you do have a lot of interest. They think you're a national resource, as one of our questions showed. They think you're doing some things in the environment. So you have an obligation to the society and the communities around you to actually go tell them some things. And they're saying, please don't stop. Tell me more, as much as you possibly can. Keep me informed. Let me know what's going on. I'm definitely interested in where things are going, and I don't think you can give me too much information for me to have about the laboratory so I can form my opinion.
Well, and actually we should stress that this answer, these survey results on this particular question, caused us to actually do some changes in public affairs. In fact, this show, Technology Today, is a good example of us saying, you know what, we need to get out and have our scientists on more, have people who have important issues about the lab like you on. We also started a new community newsletter for community residents. We're going to talk about how people can hook onto that. We also increased our visitor center hours so that people could come at different times. That would be a good example of how we responded.
Yes, in fact, what we found is that the people who go to the visitor center, of which is at least a quarter of the population in the local communities, they like the visitor center. It really is an open thing, and for the kids out there who are, have some time this summer, if you can talk your parents into taking you, it's really a nice experience. There's some great experiments there. The laboratory is close. It really is a good teaching facility that's around. But I also think that one of the things that's really important is we've always at the laboratory made all of these surveys publicly available to the public at all times. From the very first survey back in 1990, we held a press conference. We made this open and made it available for the public. And this, with the television show, it even makes it more open so that the people can see it versus just simply the press.
Right. Okay, good. Let's go to the next question that we have now. If you wanted to get the straight facts about Lawrence Livermore National Lab, what source would you go to? The internet or website, 23%, local newspaper, 16%, lab employee, 14%, library, 7%, visitor center or public affairs, 11%, don't know, 13%. Now, obviously, these were not all of the answers because it does not add up to 100%. The interesting thing about this is, gosh, look how high internet is, and that's new.
Right. This says, oh, this is brand new. In the early 90s, the internet wasn't mentioned once in the whole survey. So it has gone from 0 by the mid-90s all the way to a quarter of the population saying, I'll do it on my time, 2 o'clock in the morning, Sunday afternoon, whatever, but I want to have access, and I want the website that the laboratory provides, something that's entertaining and engaging for me to look at so I can actually find out the things I want. I want to ask my questions and then have you give me the answers back. It's a very, very interactive. Society is clearly moving in that direction.
Now, I noticed in there that our employees had a significant number as well, and I think that's significant because, we do have 8,000 employees, and chances are you live down the street from someone, perhaps, if you live in Livermore or Pleasanton. And those are really good word-of-mouth sources about the lab.
Oh yeah, the employees actually have a great deal to do with what the lab is all about. People, they're people's neighbors, as you said, and you feel when you have a neighbor, you can go ask them, and so they actually do ask them, what is this laser issue? What is going on with the Genome Project? What are all these things about? And it's very part of the community, part of life, and part of what they can really talk about to their friends.
Okay.
They play a good role.
Good. All right, let's go to the next question that we have here. Do you agree that polygraphs should be given to laboratory employees who work with national security? Agree, 72%. Disagree, 19%. Don't know, 9%. Now, this is an interesting statistic since our employees feel exactly the opposite. So I think this is a good example of the fact that something our employees need to know. The public feels that you're working in a national security job, then you need to do that. Let's go on to the next question. And this is the early or late ballot. After everything you've discussed, do you have a generally positive or negative association with Lawrence Livermore Lab? Now again, we had the early one, gone through the whole survey now at this point. Come back, you do what's known as a late ballot. So after we've told you everything, now what do you think? And of course, early on, 61% felt positive. That jumped to 70. 8% felt negative. That jumped to 13, which I think is just as important. Some people still didn't like what they heard.
Right.
And then 31% said, I don't know, but now, gosh, that's gone down to 17 because I've learned more. So when you look at that 70%, what does that say to you, Chuck?
Yeah, what that says is that everything's gone up a little bit. The positives towards the laboratory have gone up. Some of the negatives have gone up 5 percentage points in terms of, or 6 percentage points in that kind of thing. But really, when you gave information, the 31% dropped down in half to 17%. It says that after telling the public all about the problems the lab has had over this last year, and some of the good things the lab has done as well, that what they did is they netted out with a 70-13% of a positive to negative ratio. This is a very good ratio to have. It's 5 to 1. It's very positive and favorable towards the lab. But it also says that they really still need to go out and talk to the public, because 31% early on didn't know, and you need to talk to them and give them information, and they want more information. So it's a good way to measure the kinds of activities the laboratory is actually engaged in.
Right. So I think as I look at the survey results overall, I think the big lesson for the lab is talk more, be more open, tell us what's going on, tell us your side. We know that you're somewhat going to be controversial on some issues. People are always going to disagree with something that we do, but at least get the information you want us to know out and let us make our own decisions.
Right. Yeah, and I think society's changed. I mean, in the old days, there were people who were just perfect experts at everything. But society, has gotten very educated. Everybody's got at least a 12th grade, pretty much education now, and a lot of people have college, post-college educations, and they know how to read these things and understand them, and they can deal with it. They like to know about science. They like to know what our country's doing, and especially our government facilities. And I think that educational, especially in this area, has risen and created those kinds of important, vibrant gaps that need to be addressed.
Well, Chuck, thank you for joining us
Thank you.
today.
My
I
pleasure.
appreciate that. I think it was some good survey results. And thank you for joining us as well. And of course, if you have a topic that you'd like to see discussed on Technology Today, please let us know. The address is Technology Today, P.O. Box 808, L797, that's our mailbox number, Livermore, California, 94551. And of course, we did talk today a little bit about the survey that we've now instituted for the community, and if you'd like to be included on this lab's monthly electronic newsletter, a newsletter that you can actually receive via your computer, and it talks a little bit about the lab and the kinds of things that we're doing, please send an email, an electronic mail message to Lori Taylor in the lab's public affairs office. Her email address is taylor82@LLNL.gov, and she'll get you on the distribution, and you can start getting more information about the lab. You've been watching Technology Today, a program by Lawrence Livermore National Lab and Sandia. We appreciate you joining in. We'll see you next time.